Give it up for Aline Lerner. Do you want the mic or you want it here? Okay.
Hi. My name's Aline, and I'm here to talk to you about technical interviewing. Look, the reality is, if you want to not suck at technical interviews, you just have to fucking practice. Thanks for coming to my talk. Just kidding. But look, the reality is, technical interviewing is really fucking hard, and it's a lot of work. This talk is 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, I can't teach you about data structures and algorithms. I can't get you comfortable in your programming language of choice, and I can't teach you how to speak about trade-offs and reason about time and space complexity. But here's what I can do in 20 minutes, I hope. I can tell you some stories, give you some data and some anecdotes that I hope will reframe how you think about technical interviews. Because what sucks is once you've done all that hard work, what's gonna mess you up every time is if you get in your head and psych yourself out. And I'm gonna help you, I hope, not do that. So, a little bit about me. I used to be an engineer. Then I took a left turn and worked as a recruiter for a few years and ran recruiting at a few companies. And for the last 7 years, I've been the CEO and founder of a company called Interviewing.io. At Interviewing.io, we live and breathe technical interviews. It's what we do. We are an anonymous mock interview platform, but if you do well in those mock interviews, no matter who you are or what your resume looks like, you can get a job at companies like Amazon, Dropbox, both of whom I think are here today, and a whole bunch of others. In our lifetime, we've conducted over 100,000 technical interviews split between mock interviews and real ones. We've helped over 10,000 people get jobs without a resume, and the thing I'm most proud of is that 40% of those people have not looked good on paper. Here's how it works. So if you get on Interviewing.io, you can choose the kind of interviewer that you want and grab a time slot. Then at go time, you meet your interviewer in a coding environment with audio but no video, and you do your thing. You write code together, you draw pictures, you talk about things, and then at the end, your interviewer will tell you what you did well and what you need to work on and give you actionable feedback. We also collect all the data from these interviews. So we have recordings, we have the code, we have all the feedback, and that makes us very opinionated about how to not suck at them. Our users span all experience levels. So on one end, we have people that are maybe just starting out, are in a traditional CS program or in a boot camp. And on the other end, we have people that have been at this for decades. And the reality is, technical interviews suck and are hard for everyone. So let's do a quick poll. How many of you have ever done a technical interview as an interviewee? All right. Pretty much everybody. All right, now wait, don't put your hands down yet. Hold on. Leave your hand up if you have failed a technical interview. Okay, look around. I don't think anyone's surprised. Okay, don't put your hands down yet. Now, leave your hand up if around the time that you failed a technical interview, you also succeeded in one. Not surprised either. Look, so the data backs this up. Let me explain this graph. So the x-axis is your score, average score. 1 is bad, 4 is great. The y-axis here is the standard deviation. So the higher up you go, the more your scores are all over the place. And what's crazy is, in our experience, and this has held up as we've done way more interviews than this, only 20% of people are consistent in how they perform from interview to interview. Everybody else is all over the place. So those people that are kind of in the top right probably got a bunch of 4s and a bunch of 2s and a bunch of 1s. At one point in Interviewing.io's history, we actually used to hire for both Uber and Lyft. And what was crazy is people would pass a Lyft interview and then bomb an Uber interview the next day, or vice versa, right? Performance in these, this is what I'm taking away from this, right? Performance in these interviews is actually not deterministic. So they're an imperfect tool, and no matter how good you are, you will randomly bomb interviews from time to time. And why is that important for you to know? Because more than anything else, once you do all that work we talked about earlier, technical interviewing is a mind game and it's also a numbers game. And if you internalize that, you're not going to psych yourself out. If you internalize that, you can dust yourself off, go on to the next one, either fail it or succeed and move on. Now, I'm going to share something that really sucks with you guys. So, at one point on Interviewing.io, I was curious how women are performing relative to men, right? We know the gender of our users. And it turned out that women were actually performing significantly worse than men in technical interviews. So I'm kind of an armchair pseudoscientist, and I thought, is that possible? Are women just worse at this? Well, maybe. Let's find out. So I dug into the data, and what I saw is that women are actually 7 times more likely to quit after 1 bad interview than men, and 3 times more likely to quit after 2 bad interviews. And when we corrected for that and took away people that quit after 1 or 2 interviews and a bad performance, all the disparity in the performance data went away. And the reason I wanted to include this slide in this talk is I feel like shining a light on this and just saying it out loud and making us aware of it might help change that behavior. Everybody fucks these interviews up. Everybody suffers from imposter syndrome. On our platform, both men and women experience it equally, but women tend to quit and men keep going. So don't quit, just keep going. Outside of some of this theoretical stuff, right, I also want to arm you with some practical tips. You probably came to this talk because you didn't want to hear fluff and inspiration. You actually wanted some stuff that you could take home that would make you better. So practical stuff starts now. Here we go. A few tips. You probably know this, but when you're in a technical interview, don't start writing code right away. We've actually analyzed the audio and the code, and candidates who are successful actually start writing code on average about 4 minutes later in a 45-minute interview than candidates who are unsuccessful. Now, these little screenshots are from Slack. We have hundreds of professional interviewers that conduct mock interviews, and a few days before this talk, I got on Slack and I said, hey guys, I have to give a talk about how to not suck at technical interviewing. Go, tell me all the things. Outside of our data, tell me what you feel strongly about. And this is what our interviewer said. The best performers tend to talk about what they're going to do before they do it. And people that are really excellent will maybe even give their interviewer some options and say, hey, I can do it this way, I can do it that way. This way might be more performant, might be less performant. Which one do you want me to do? Here's an anti-pattern. Don't throw spaghetti at the wall. So what do I mean by that? One thing that we've seen people do, which almost always results in a failure, is start going through different problem types in their head and asking their interviewer, is this a hash table problem? No? Okay. Is this a dynamic programming problem? Still no? Okay, is this a tree problem? Still no? Once you do that, you've dug yourself into a hole. You might be having all those thoughts because as you practice, you'll realize there are about 4 different problem types. Most of them fall into 4 distinct categories. But don't say it out loud. Just talk about your approach and ask the interviewer for their feedback. Once you do start writing code, which you should wait a few minutes to do, write clean code. So this is kind of a nerdy statistic, but on average, successful candidates define 3.29 functions in their code, whereas unsuccessful ones only define 2.71. Is this the be-all and end-all? No, but what this means is eventually you should get your code to a place where it's clean. Maybe you write everything out in one function and you clean it up, or maybe it's your style to actually create a skeleton and put in the function signatures before you actually fill them in. But eventually you want to get to a place where you don't have a big, messy wall of code. And this one is a little bit controversial. So if you hear about people talking about technical interviews, they'll often say that it's not about getting to a working solution, but that rather it's about showing how you can think. And that's a nice idea, right? We all want to believe that these interviews actually measure our potential and that they can see through us, and they'll show what we're capable of, even if we can't get working code this time. The sad reality is that people who write working code do tend to do significantly better than those who don't. But the good news is that not having working code is not a death sentence. If you can actually describe what you meant to do, you have a shot of passing. Next tip. This is, I think, what separates excellent interviewees from mediocre ones. At the end of the day, an interview is meant to evaluate whether you should be joining a team and whether people want to work with you. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. These interviews are super stressful and it can feel adversarial. But one of the best interviewers that I've ever met said that in his mind, an interview is meant to be an exercise that shows if two people can be smart together. I really like that. That's what I want to believe the world is. It's not always like that. But anything that you can do to show your interviewer that you're self-aware, that you're collaborative, and you can be smart together is going to help. Here's a little more from our interviewers. One weird trick: use the choose your own adventure technique. Offer your interviewer choices on what they want you to focus on. So you can say, my proposed solution will work, but it's not the most performant. Do you want me to calculate its performance? Do you want me to jump in, or do you want me to do something else? An extra pro tip: suggest what you want to do and say, I'm happy with this approach. It'll work even though it's not the fastest. And I'm going to start coding. But if you don't want me to do that, let me know. If you can get in the habit of doing this, this is really going to separate you from most other interviewees. Something similar, this is specific for systems design interviews, but the point is the same. Different interviewers, even if they ask the same question, might be looking for different things. And it's not cheating, and it's a good thing to actually ask them, what do you want me to focus on? What matters to you? Ask them up front what matters to them, and then you'll know what to do. Most people don't do this. One other interviewer suggested, at the beginning of the interview, taking control and even doing something like this. You don't have to use this wording verbatim, especially if this is not your style, but I thought this was great. My typical work process in a technical challenge is to spend a few minutes thinking quietly about the problem and writing down notes. This is great because it sets the expectation that you're not going to start talking right away, and then you don't have to worry about the fact that you're not talking and then psych yourself out for not talking in the first few minutes. Then you say, well, I code, I'll work quietly, but I'll be sure to pause now and then and share my thoughts. If you do stuff like this, it will blow your interviewer's mind. And randomly, we've done a lot of work to try to predict what attributes of a person's resume or their experience might be predictive of doing well in interviews. And we noticed that people who do well have tended to take a subset of these classes. I used to work at Udacity a long time ago, but certainly not affiliated with them and not with Coursera. This is just what the data told us, so I'm going to tell it to you guys. All right, now I have a question for you all. Of all of these attributes, which do you think are the biggest predictor of success let's just say real interviews, in real interviews? Where you worked, where you went to school, whether you have a CS degree, how you've done in real interviews up until now, your gender, years of experience, taking online classes like we saw on the last slide, how well you did in mock interviews, and how many mock interviews you did before the real thing. Last one. See, I gave it away when I said it's about practice at the beginning. Exactly right. But this isn't just me saying it because I run a practice platform. You can say, Aline, of course you have a vested interest in telling us that practice matters. This is your livelihood. And I'll say, well, shit, you're right. But also practice really matters. You don't have to practice with us. You can practice with your friends. You can do throwaway interviews at companies you don't care about, although that kind of sucks because then you have to talk to 50 kajillion recruiters about how you're so passionate about whatever, right? So you can skip that and practice on a mock interview platform. Another one that's not interviewing I/O is called Pramp. Some of you might have used that and have heard of that too. But however you do it, you got to practice. Here's the data. So A lot of our users have asked us, how do I know when I'm ready to interview at a FANG? And you don't have to go to FANG. I have no opinions about whether you should or shouldn't, but because so many people interview at FANGs, a disproportionate amount of our data comes from there. So we looked at people's average scores in mock interviews, and then looked at the likelihood of them passing real phone screens. And one thing you'll notice here is that these lines they're kind of all over the place, but I'd expect them to look like this, and instead they're kind of flat. What did matter, as you all astutely guessed, is how many mock interviews you've done. There's actually an inflection point at around 5 mocks. And depending on which company you're interviewing at, your chances of passing a real interview will 1.5 to 2x after 5 mock interviews. Why is that? Well, I have some ideas. One of the things we ask our users is whether they've seen a question before at the end of their interview. And turns out, not surprisingly, if you've seen the question before, you're actually more likely to pass. You're not that much more likely because each interviewer might vary up the constraints of the question a little differently. They might expect different things, but 17% is not trivial, and there are really only a few specific types of questions. But I think the main reason that practice actually helps is that you get used to collaborating with your interviewer, thinking out loud, and working together. And I hope that's been a common refrain in this short talk. These are snippets from our users when we asked them how they felt before and after practice. And this is my favorite one. It's okay to get some guidance from the interviewer. You can actually feel that the interviewers are evaluating more than just your problem-solving skills and communication. It's how you work as a team and whether you'll be a good person to collaborate with. A lot of that stuff I told you about earlier, talking to your interviewer about what matters to them, saying, hey, I can do it this way, or I can do it that way. This way is more performant. This way is something else. It takes practice to be able to say that out loud, right? All of these tips, it just takes time, just like building muscle memory. You have to get used to saying these things out loud. So, my parting thoughts here, I have one resource I wanted to share with you, and then I hope I have a gift that you will find useful. So, first, the resource. On Interviewing.io, we actually have a bunch of interview replays. They're public. It's like a very, very boring Twitch of just watching people interviewing. There are a ton of these. You can filter by, the type of interview, where the interviewer is from, programming languages. Anybody can see these. We have a bunch more if you actually create an account. And once you click into them, not only can you watch them, but you can actually read the transcript and read feedback from the interviewer. What is amazing to me is that people who failed their interviews actually share their replays with the public. I'm in awe of those people, and I think sometimes watching failed interviews can be more instructive than watching good ones. And finally, here's my gift to you. If you're a Render attendee, you get a free mock interview. That's a QR code. I promise it doesn't take you anywhere bad. It actually just takes you to this URL at the bottom. We have limited supply. I think we should have enough for everybody, but I would advise getting in there and just clicking through and claiming it as soon as possible, and then you can use it whenever you're ready. All right, that's all I've got. Thank you for coming to my talk. Do we have time for questions? I'm going to take that as a yes. Yes, sir.
That was a great talk, thank you.
Thank you.
So I have heard, and I have actually done that in interviews, if we do not, many a times we don't know something, we forget the syntax, or there are some situations, and the interviewer allows us to do Google. So in that case, firstly, should we do that? And secondly, if we do, then does the Googling skills or opening some certain links help, or what are the things around that?
Yep, that's a really good question. Just like anything else in an interview, This will vary from interviewer to interviewer. And something like this is actually an opportunity to show your self-awareness and collaboration and to say, hey, I don't remember the syntax for this. Is it okay if I look it up? Some interviewers might say no. Some interviewers might say yes. On our platform, interviewers are actually split between this. Some are really into it, some are not. If your interviewer says yes, I think, yes, what you Google and how you Google it will inform what they think about you, because so much of your time in a real job is spent Googling shit and looking things up on Stack Overflow, right? So if you can show that you can do that well in an interview, that is not a bad thing. But please ask your interviewer first, because some of them hate it and will just fail you automatically because they'll think you're cheating. By the way, I think those are bad interviewers, but not up to me.
Cool, thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm curious, in your experience, how often do you think that interviewers actually care about the big O of a solution?
All the fucking time. Well, sorry, it depends. Different companies do interview differently. Our world, for better or for worse, is companies that do FANG-style interviews. And at those companies, I can't imagine an interview where at the end you're not going to be asked about big O. I'd say that time complexity probably matters a little more than space complexity, but you will have to reason about it. I think what separates a really good interviewer from a bad one, by the way, and I would love to give a talk on how to not be a shitty interviewer. I think that's a very important talk to give. But good interviewers, even if you don't know the terminology, right? Even if you don't know how to talk about time complexity, can still pass you if you can reason through it. And you can say, well, I have 2 for loops, right? One is inside the other. This one's gonna run this many times, so it's gonna be n times m. If you can do stuff like that, a good interviewer will be into it. Some interviewers are sticklers for terminology, and they're bad. That doesn't help you if they're bad, but I hope over time more interviewers will not be.
Do you have any data on take-home assessments versus a live coding assessment?
Yes. So take-home assessments are kind of polarizing. Some people believe they're better at assessing candidates, but the reason I think that a lot of companies don't use them is because of the attrition rates. So if you give people a take-home, I think on average 30% of them will do it. Whereas if you tell people you have to do a 1-hour technical interview, 90% of them will do it. So I think we all like take-homes, but what ends up happening in practice is that people don't engage. In terms of their ability to predict whether somebody is good at the job, I think take-homes are actually a little bit better on average, because there are so many. I think if you have a great interviewer and a technical interview is probably going to be more predictive than a take-home. But there aren't that many great interviewers, so in their absence, a take-home is more predictive. But as long as people keep dropping out and not doing them, companies will probably not adopt them. What I think, by the way, companies should do is just give people a choice. You can either do a take-home or you can do a technical interview. We'll time it so your whole interview process will take the same number of hours, and you decide how you best want to present yourself. Do you want to yell? I can repeat your question. Yeah, so most of our mock interviewers come from FANG. That's because that's what our users tend to want. We have had non-FANG interviewers in the past, and what we've seen there, especially if they work at a smaller company, is an interview where you still have to write code, but the interview will probably skew a little more practical. I mean, we're not a FANG company. When we interview for ourselves, one of the questions, and I hope my engineers won't be mad for revealing this, but one of the questions that we like to ask is write an interview scheduler, because that's what we had to do. We had to build an interview scheduler. So I think smaller companies will tend to put a little more effort into their questions, whereas FANGs, I think, have gotten kind of lazy, and they're like, oh, we have this name brand. We can treat our candidates like crap and just ask them verbatim lead code questions, and we're always going to have candidates coming in, and it's okay if our process isn't very good. Any other questions? All right, guys. Oh, yes, sir. Last one. When am I going to do the how to be a good interviewer talk? if they have me back next year, I can do that one. I have a lot of feelings and thoughts on that subject. All right, thank you, it's been a pleasure.